welcome everybody, and Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. As we end the year, this is the the second last year before 5782, and we look forward to everybody should have a wonderful year, healthy year. Of course, right after this class, right after 15 minutes after this class or so, Rabbi Liebtag will be giving his shiur on Sefer Dvarim, the link between Malchut and Zichronot. But now we're to Sefer Yonah, and it's a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Helfgot, who'll be back next week to finish the series. This is part 3 of 4. Vakasha, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi Kelman. So I wanted to start by, last week we studied Perek Bet in depth. We ended Perek Aleph, and then we studied Perek Bet. And this week I wanted to just add a couple of points to our study of Perek Bet, and then go into Perek Gimel of Sefer Yonah. And then the last shiur will focus on Perek Dalet and maybe some post-biblical explorations of the book of Jonah, depending on how much time we have. And again, the shiur is dedicated to the I'm blanking on the name, Jay, the young man. I'm sorry.
Shmuel Eliyahu Alman.
Shmuel Eliyahu Alman, Zichrono Livracha, should have an Ilui Neshama. So in Perek Bet, we saw that Yonah was in both in the water and then in the belly of the fish, and he prays to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And at this point, it's important to develop and point out an interesting idea that a number of writers and people have noticed over the years, which of course, and it's kind of at first blush, it's obvious, but to develop it a little bit further. A number of people have mentioned the fact that Yonah, we talked about at the beginning in the first shiur, the name Yonah, of course, can mean many things, but most specifically, it of course means a dove in the book. I'm sorry, in the Tanakh, most mentions of the book of the word Yud Vav Nun Hey refers to a dove, which has all kinds of symbolism in the Bible. Today, it has the symbolism of peace, but especially in the Bible, it has the symbolism more of returning to its nest, returning to its home, bringing back messages. In fact, it was a courier pigeon in many societies. And so the Yonah, of course, also immediately reminds the biblical reader of the story of the Mabul, the story of the flood, and coming back to the Teva, as opposed to the Orev, as opposed to the raven, which goes out and has nothing to bring to Jonah, Noach, excuse me. It has nothing of substance. It brings back nothing. It doesn't tell Noach anything. The Yonah goes 3 times in the Mabul story, and it again comes back to tell Noach, excuse me, what's going on. The first time it tells Noach that nothing has happened, that the waters are still out there. The second time it brings back the fact that the Alei Zayit, which indicate that the waters have started to recede. And finally, the third time it doesn't return, it goes to its home, in effect showing the development that in fact, now it is the water has totally receded, and Noach takes off the michseh, he takes off the cover of the teva. And many people have noted the idea of the Mabul, of course, is the undoing of creation. The undoing of creation, right? Creation starts in the Bible with the Choshech al Pnei Tahom, and Ruach Elokim Rachefet al Pnei Hamayim. There's this kind of primordial soup that we're introduced to, and the water, God creates the world by separating light from darkness, the lower waters from the upper waters, the Teira'eh HaYabasha, and then let the world, the land emerge from the receding waters. That's the way it's presented in Genesis 1. And it's very much that which happens in the Mabul. The Mabul is the undoing, the uncreation. All of a sudden, the upper waters and the lower waters get closer and closer. There's rain from on top, and the Tehomot go up until there is no, you can't even see the mountains, as it says. You couldn't even see the heads of the mountains. So the Mabul is an undoing of creation. And in Perek Chet, where, of course, God remembers, Vayizkor Elohim, God remembered the world, and he remembered Noach, as we say in a few days on Rosh Hashanah, Vayizkor Elohim et Noach, et kol asher ito bateva, and in the language of the liturgy, be'ahava, he remembered them with love. So what happens? There's a recreation. There's a recreation. Slowly the water goes away. And once again, first they can see the mountains, Ararat. Then they can see, all of a sudden there's vegetation, the Alei Zayit. All of a sudden there's vegetation again. Then the water is totally dry. And now animals and human beings can make forth on the world and live again. So there's a kind of recreation, which of course is highlighted in chapter 9 of Genesis, that when actually the world is created, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives the exact same bracha to the human being and to the animal kingdom that he gave in the beginning of Genesis, towards the end of Genesis 1. Pru urvu, umilu et haaretz, shirtzu ba'aretz urevuba. So you have the recreation of the world. And again, many writers have pointed it out. And when we talk about the recreation of the world, there's also an image that emerges from the Mabul of birth, of a rebirth, of a birthing, that the Teva is almost like a womb where you have everything taken care of for you. You have the protective structure surrounded by all this water and stuff going on around you. And you are, so to speak, ultimately pushed out of the Teva. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to appear to Noach and say mina Teva. Go out in the Teva and, so to speak, start to live life again as an independent person, where you have to plant and you have to build and you have to do this. There's a certain element of birth that's involved in the story of the Mabul. And the same thing when we come to the story here, when we come to the story of Yonah, Yonah is also parallel. And of course, as many, again, clearly the name Yonah evokes the Mabul, but there are other things that clearly evoke the sense that there's going to be a destruction and there's going to be a rebirth. For example, we note that, again, Jonah is in the belly of the fish. First, he's thrown into the water. Then he's eaten by the fish, and he's in the belly of the fish. And then ultimately, he is cast out of the fish. And there are a lot of literary connections between the Jonah story and the Mabul story. First and foremost, 40 days. The rain comes down for 40 days and 40 nights that will bring about the destruction of the world. Jonah is going to come into, as we'll see this morning, into the city of Nineveh and say, Od Arba'im Yom v'Ninveh nehepechet. In 40 days, the city will be destroyed and upturned. And of course, the word nehepechet reminds us of total destruction, because in the Bible, Vayahafoch Hashem et Sodom, Kumi mitoch ir hahafecha, the city of destruction. Lahafoch is the total undoing of the city of Sodom. So you have this idea of the 40 days, which leads to the destruction, as it says in Yonah Perek Gimel Pasuk Daled. We also find very similar to the story in the book of Jonah. And let me put up my Tanakh now. Put up my Tanakh. Let's get, sorry. Tanakh. Back. We'll share our screen. So if we go back, we'll put this over here. We go to our, of course, in Genesis, and again, just to highlight what I just mentioned, again, after the world is recreated, Vayivarech Elohim et Noach v'et banav vayomer lehem pru urvu milu et haaretz umorachem v'chitchem yeh al kol chayat haaretz v'al kol of hashamayim, etc., etc. So you have the repetition v'atem pru urvu shitub haaretz. When presenting the sin of the world, the Bible says, Eila toldot Noach, ish tzadik tamim haya b'dorotav, et Elohim hitalech Noach, vayoled Noach shalosha banim, vatishachet haaretz lifnei Elohim, vatimalei haaretz chamas. Vayar Elohim et haaretz v'nei mishchata, ki shchit kol basar et dar kol haaretz. The entirety, everything, both the human beings and the animals, everything was destroyed. When we go, of course, to the story of Yonah, and when we look at our chapter in describing the sin of Yonah, so the Bible tells us the following. It says that the Melech said, V'yashuvu ishmi darko hara'ah umin hachamas asher b'chapehem, the Hamas that is in their hands, which of course, again, these are the two places where the Bible uses that terminology, again, indicating the parallel between the story of Yonah and the story of the Mabul, that in both Hamas is presented as the ultimate sin and the Ra'ah that has come before God. And this is the thing that causes the Anshe, again, and the Anshe Ninveh do tshuva from the Chet. So this is pretty clear in terms of the parallel. And this idea that in both there is this rebirth theme is something that already Philo of Alexandria, he talked about it when it came to the Teva. He talks about it when it comes to the Teva, that the Teva is like the Yitzirat Havlad. And it's interesting that if one looks in the Midrashim, for example, if you look at Rashi on the Arba'im Yom and Arba'im Laila, which are described in the Mabul, Rashi, quoting the Medrash Rabbah, says, Kimo Yitzirat Havlad, the 40 days until, from the time then the zygote, the gamete, whatever you want to call it, the Maya Ba'alma, to use Chazal's term, the water that then becomes the beginning of an embryo, is after 40 days. That's why in the laws of abortion, and many poskim say that before 40 days, it doesn't have any status halachically. So 40 days is Yitzirat Havlad, 40 days. So there is a new mitziyut that is going to emerge. And it's very interesting, just to quote you, an interesting midrash that's cited by the Yalkut Shimoni as follows. Listen to this midrash. V'haya Yonah shlosha yamim b'me'ei hadaga. Yonah was in the fish, because it's interesting, again, just to highlight where the midrash is playing off of. So if you look in the book of Jonah, back in chapter 2, I don't know if you noticed, but at the beginning it says, Vayiman Hashem dag gadol, zachar, Vayihi Yonah b'me'ei hadag, Vayipalel Yonah el Hashem mim'ei hadaga. And at the end, Vayomer Hashem ladag. So it's very interesting. Chazal noticed that they, at least the midrashic sense of omni significance, that it started with the word dag, which is ostensibly zachar, and then it uses the daga, which is ostensibly a nikeva. So why the change in nomenclature? So you could say it's legivun halashon. That's the nature of biblical Hebrew. It's simply part of the way that biblical Hebrew, there's a lot of fluidity between the use of the feminine and the masculine, but don't make too much big deal out of it. Just like Yeshayahu, Yeshaya, these are kind of the small things. But the Midrash, of course, will never go down that direction. The Midrash believes in omni-significance of every letter and every word. And so listen to this fantastic Midrash that I'm quoting from Yalkut Shimoni on Yonah. Remez Tuf Kuf Nun. Let me see if I can put it up, and then everybody can see. Let me see if I can put it up and see if we can. Yalkut Shimoni. Yalkut Shimoni. Yonah Tuf Kuf Nun. Let's see if we can get it. Yalkut Shimoni. Let's see. There's Yalkut Shimoni Al Nach. Tuf Kuf. Yalkut Shimoni. Yonah Remez. This is not Sefer Yonah, but okay. What can I tell you? Yalkut Shimoni, I'll say for Yonah. Yonah. Let's see. Siman Tuf Kuf Nun. Okay. So. Okay. Rabbi Meir, oh man. Bimei Hadaga. Let's see if I can share the screen. We'll share the screen. Okay. Okay. Yonah. Let me see if I can.
It's on the last paragraph, I think.
I'm sorry?
Under the blue, I think, is what you're looking for. Next paragraph. Yeah.
La 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 la. I'm looking where it talks about the fish. Vayar Yonah shlosha yamim b'mei hadaga v'lo hitpalel. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not exactly this source. I'm sorry. Let me just read to you from the Otzar Midrashim, and it's not exactly this source. So it says the Midrash. V'haya Yonah shlosha yamim b'mei hadag v'lo hitpalel. For 3 days, Jonah was in the fish. The Midrash says, the male fish, and didn't pray. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ani hirchavti lo makom b'mei hadag kedei shlo yitzta'er v'hu eino mitpalel lefanai. I gave him a nice suite in the dag, and he didn't pray. Ani mazmin lo dagam me'uberet. I'm going to bring him a female fish which is pregnant. It has 365, which is, of course, is a fascinating number. It means it's like a year. So that he will be bothered and he'll pray before me. I want the prayer. And she went and she said, and the Midrash says, the female dog said to the male dog, if you don't cough up Jonah, I'm going to swallow you up. So she coughed up Jonah, and Jonah went into the pregnant. Palto hadagu bal'auto hadaga. Kevan shenichnas l'tok mea hayam mitzta'er b'tzar gadol. At that point, Jonah was very crowded. There was no room. You couldn't get your own bed. It was literally like the teva. It was full of little animals. It was hard. Miyad kivein libo l'tfilavi palel Yonah l'Hashem nim'ei adaga. And then he goes and he prays, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at that point, kicks Jonah out, spits him out against his will, just like what happens in a birth, and Jonah emerges new. So there's again, I just wanted to add that to our discussion from last week. The parallels to the story in the Mabul story, the sense of rebirth, of getting a second chance, the sense of coming to a new world. I'm sorry? The fish as a kind of teva that protected Yonah, the sense of coming back, that he couldn't run away from his mission, but he comes back to where he's supposed to come back to. And again, is he ready to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from him? Okay, now let us actually go into Perek. Let's go into what we were doing before. We'll go to our Tanakh, and we'll go into Perek Gimel itself and add a couple of comments as well in terms of Perek Gimel. So if we look in Perek Gimel in the book of Jonah, so the Bible says, "Vayhi dvar Adonai el Yonah shenit lemor." We talked about the fact that this time it is again it's a rebirth, it's recreation. It's the second time, just like the beginning. He called him. This time it's shenit. Kum lechel ninve ha'ir hagdola ukra eleh takriya. The same exact language that we had at the beginning. Kum lechel ninve ha'ir hagdola ukra aleha. Interesting that this time it's not aleha, it's eleha. Does the change mean anything significant? The change could mean in the sense of, again, it's not a big deal, or it could mean the sense of reflecting the fact that in the first time, Jonah would not actually fulfill his mission. And God said, Ukra aleh, talk about it, because he never went into the city. Here it's Kra Eleha. Maybe there's a more intimate connection, direct connection between the human beings. I don't know, but it is interesting that it shifts. Ukra Eleha takra asher anochi dover elecha. This, I think, is very significant. In the first time, it just says, Ukra aleha, go and call it ki altara tam lefanai. This time it says, no, kra eleha et hadavar asher anochi dover elecha, that which I will say to you, which again I think is reflective of the idea. I think it's reflective of the idea that God is going to make sure that he fulfills his destiny this time. You're going to do exactly as I say. Asher anochi dover elecha. This is very similar to, if you remember, from a few weeks ago in Parshat Shavua, in Parshat Balak. In Parshat Balak, if you remember the way Parshat Balak begins, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says to Bilam, Bilam says, I'll say whatever God says. And there too, he says, God says, what I tell you to do, that should be what you say. And clearly, that's not what Bilam wants to do all the time. And Bilam doesn't do that. And later in this, in the next parak, God has to, keeps emphasizing to him, Kol Asher, everything that God is going to tell you to do, that's what you're going to do. So here too, Jonah is, so to speak, has to do exactly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him he's going to do. So he goes to Nineveh, Vayakam, Vayelech no Yonah Kidvar Hashem. It's not necessarily something he wanted to do. And again, we don't know exactly yet why he doesn't want to do it. Does he not want to do it because he's afraid he's going to be unsuccessful? Does he not want to do it because he doesn't like Nineveh? Does he not want to do it because he will be successful. The text is at this point ambiguous. It's part of the literary tension. It holds back until the very last chapter. What exactly are the reasons why Jonah doesn't go? It could have said it in chapter 1, but it holds back. We already talked about the Ir Gdolah. It was a really big city to God, which again, on a simple level, just means like in Israeli slang today, it was a yalla city. It was like a really gigantic city, just like in the South, they used to say, a god-awful storm, which didn't mean it was a religious storm. It just means it was really big. It was really intense. It was awesome. Mahalach Shloshet Yamim. So he goes to Nineveh, which is a city of about 3 days. In terms of, and they've discovered in the archaeology that Nineveh, which I mentioned last week when we looked at the maps, is basically around the city of Mosul and ancient Nineveh. And if you look around in terms of the circumference of going around the entire city and the entire suburbs of that area, would have taken a couple of days. So it would have taken 3 days. Mahalach Shloshet Yamim. Vayachal Noah lavo ba'ir malach yom echad, which is amazing. Jonah comes to the city and he walks 1 day, which is important, meaning he's not like Yirmiyahu. This is an important point to make. He's not like Yirmiyahu, who goes into the middle of the street, or Yeshayahu, and makes a nevuah, he gives a proclamation and everybody's going to hear it. He goes door to door. Vayachal Noah lavo ba'ir. That's the way many of the moderns interpret, and I think it's correct. He goes door to door, knocking on the door. But by the end of 1 day, he's already successful. Malach Yom Echad. It spreads by word of mouth. By the time he's finished a day, and he's saying, Vayikra vayomar od 40 yom v'Ninveh nehepechet. In another 40 days, Nineveh will be turned over like Sodom. And notice the Bible doesn't tell us that he said, unless you do tshuva. Maybe he said it, but the text leaves it out. Or maybe he didn't even say it because he has a problem with that. It's the people themselves who seem to understand that. Vayomer, vayaminu anshe Ninveh be'elohim. They believed in God. Vayikru'u tzom, vayilbishu sakim, migdolam, ve'ad ktanam. And they called a fast day. They wore sakim, and from old to young. Now, vayiga hadavar el melech Ninveh, even the shmu'ah that had been started by Jonah from the shmu'ah that it started, of course, it even reaches the king from the grassroots. Vayakam mikiso, kind of parallel to Vayakam Yonah. The king gets up, Vayakam. Jonah originally did not want to go. He rather Vayered. He went away. He went down. But here, the king, who has no name, Vayakam mikiso, Vaya'aver adarto me'alav. He takes off his royal garment. Vayichas sak vayeshev al ha'efer. He sits down on the floor. Vayazek vayomer b'nivei mitam hamelech ugdolav leimor ha'adam v'habeima ha'bakar v'atzon al yitamu me'uma al yir'u umayim al yishtu. So we have this very strange thing of the animals also being brought into the story. Now, of course, animals don't do tshuva. They work by instinct. They work by a life instinct. But maybe that itself, there's a couple of things going on here. Again, first of all, as I mentioned in the first shiur, the fact that the animals are doing tshuva, again, may add to the fantastic nature of the story, which may point to it being more of a morality tale than an actual historical event, a la what the Vilna Gaon may have, developed in his commentary, and a la what most people today say, that there was a Jonah and there was, but it doesn't have to be that this story actually happened. It's a story that's trying to say is trying to give a message. Number two, also, I'm sorry, didn't want to do that. So let's go back. Sorry, let's go back. Number two, the fact that the Bible describes the animals involved or being brought involved into the process, whatever the logic or whatever the rationality of it, also brings home the parallelism to the Mabul, that the entirety of the world and all of the animals and everything in creation was at stake in the story, was going to be destroyed. The parallel to the animals is very, very powerful here. The parallel to the Mabul is very powerful here in the context of what's going on in the story. And finally, in the context of the animals, we'll get to a final point in a few minutes, but let's just go on, and which will lead us to our next major topic in this parak. So Jonah goes throughout the city. They do tshuva. As many have noted, there's also an element here of the tshuva and of the story of the Chet HaEgel in two places. First of all, we already pointed out that we have the echo of the Mabul, V'yashuvu ish midarko hara'ah umin hachamas asher b'chahem. But then he says, Mi yodea yashuv v'nichama Elohim v'shav mecharon apo v'lo noved. Who knows? Maybe God will nicham, God will regret, change his mind, which of course is connected to the language exactly back in the story of the Chet HaEgel. Bnei Yisrael were mashchit, which of course again reminds us of the Mabul. God said, Lech red kishichet amcha asher alita meretz Mitzrayim, saru maher min haderech asher tzivitim. They have left the path to bad path. And then God says, V'chara pi bahem v'achalem, v'aseh otcha legoy gadol, Vayichal Moshe et pnei Hashem Elokav, which there, of course, means God prayed to God. Moshe prayed, to God. Here in the Jonah story, you have a little play on words. Vayachal, Jonah began to go from place to place. Lama Hashem yicharei apcha be'amecha, b'koach gadol u'biyad chazaka. Lama yomru Mitzrayim lemor bira'ah hotziam larog otam ba'arim. Shuv mecharon apecha v'yinachem al hara le'amecha. And that's exactly what happens. Vayinachem Adonai al hara'ah asher diber lasot le'amo. There, of course, it's parochial. It's God showing mercy, and he regrets what he did, of what he was about to do, or he changes his mind, whatever term you want to use. And I'm not getting involved in the philosophical issue of the medievals. What does it mean that God changes his mind? But that, of course, God changes his mind, and he has nechama, and he does that here. And here too, when we come back to the story of Jonah, we see in the story of Jonah, we have a similar language. We have V'yashuvu ish midarko hara'ah, saru maher min haderech, mi yodea yashuv, v'nicham ha'Elohim, v'yinachem Adonai, v'shav mecharon apo, shuv mecharon apecha, v'yinachem al hara'ah le'amecha, v'yar Elohim et ma'asehem, ki shavu midarkam, v'yinachem Elohim al hara'ah, asher diber lasot. One expects the word la'amo, but it's asher diber lasot lahem v'lo asa. You also have an echo of the Chet HaEgel at Har Sinai here with Ha'adam v'abahima v'habar al yir'u umayim al yishtu, that they should not go and be ro'et sown on top wherever they are, which of course reminds us of Matan Torah, where Habakar Vatsa Al Yiru El Mula Har Hahu. So you have a lot of echoes here of the Nechama and the Teshuvah involved here. So this is very, very interesting, and it's very powerful. And it was, it, as again I said, it has the echoes of the Chet HaEgel, and it has the Slicha v'Chapara of the Chet HaEgel. However, remember that in the Chet HaEgel, the Jewish people don't do any tshuva at this stage. Maybe later in Perek Lamed Gimel, Vayakol Mevakesh Hashem would seek out God. At this stage, it's purely the intercession of Moshe that saved the Jewish people. And this intercession did not bring full slicha v'chapara. It was simply survival. It was simply a tshuva, if you want to use that term. It was simply, in the Chet HaEgel, Kadosh Baruch Hu's mitnachem, which also parenthetically reminds us of the Mabul. Because if we go back for a second to the Mabul, we also remember, and there's a big play on words. If we go back to the Mabul story, at the beginning of Perek Vav, that God saw what human beings were doing. Vayar Hashem ki rabara at adam ba'aretz v'chol yetzer machshavot libo rak kol hayom. Vayinachem Hashem ki asa et adam ba'aretz vayitatzev el libo. Em Hashem emchet adam asher barati me'al pnei adama. Me'adam ad behema, again the behema. Ad remes ki nichamti ki asitim v'noach matzachein b'nei Hashem. Of course, the play on the words nichamti here in a negative. V'noach matzachein nun chet nun, as opposed to nichamti, God who has, right? And of course, we remember that when Noach was born, at the end of Perek Chet, ze yinachamenu mima'asenu. This one will bring us some nechama, umeitzvon yadenu, etc. There's supposed to be, Noach is supposed to bring nechama. Unfortunately, he lives in a world in which God is mitnachem, ki nichamti, ki asitim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is yinachem, ki asa et adam. And he's mitatzev el libo. He's mitatzev el libo, and Noach is supposed to solve the problem of the fact that there is this itzavon. So it's clearly all these play on words here. And of course, here in the story of the of Yonah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mitnachem in a positive way, just like in the Chet HaEgel. He regrets what he did. So he changes his mind, and he's willing to, he's shav mecharon apo, which is a play on v'yashuvu ish midarko. If everybody does tshuva, mi odea yashuv, v'nicham ha'elohim, v'shav mecharon apo v'lo novei, which of course is about survival, just like in the Chet HaEgel, that first encounter with God, and where he changes his mind, is purely about survival. There's not yet the full slicha v'chapara, but v'lo novei. I also, again, point out, just to remind us, those who weren't here, in the story of the Malachim, the story of Jonah in the boat, which is parallel to Jonah in the in Nineveh, and there too, Jonah, the Rav HaChovel said to him, "Kum kira el Elohecha, call out to your God. Ulayit ashet Elohim lanu v'lo novei." There too, the question was, will we live? Will we die? Will we live? Will we die? And here too, v'lo novei, we will not be destroyed. And God sees this, and God changes his mind. V'lo asa. Now, I said I want to get back. I mentioned two ideas related. I mentioned, and we will not be lost. V'lo noved, we won't die. Okay. Now, I mentioned two ideas in relationship to the fact that the animals are brought into this. Either this is part of the fantastical element of the story, or number two, this is bringing home the parallel to the Mabul story that all of creation, including the animals, were up for destruction. And if you remember the descriptions in the Midrashim about the Mabul, about the flood, about how even the animals had corrupted themselves. So there's this parallel. But it does raise a third possibility, which is the topic that I want to spend the next few minutes about, which is that on a one level, one can read this as a very almost ridiculous kind of tshuva, that maybe there's something very ridiculous about this tshuva. Maybe there's something almost performative about this tshuva. Maybe there's something not real about this tshuva. It's only skin deep. The fact that you put sakim on animals, maybe that itself reflects the fact that it's more about going through certain motions rather than fully changing. And maybe that's what the king, who does initiate this, but he also says, they should call out to God, let them change fully. And then so is that one, that there's a progression here in terms of pshat. But it's interesting that the rabbis themselves struggled with this question of the tshuva of the Anshe Ninveh. The rabbis themselves struggled with this, and that's what I would like to look at here for a few minutes. So if I can open this window. So I want to, this is very appropriate for Yom Kippur, which we're coming upon, right? So the Teshuvah, and I'm going to translate everything here. The Mishnah in Ta'anit, in describing fast days that were instituted in the time of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is written, it was edited in the late 2nd century, but it has masorot, it has traditions that go much earlier. It has traditions that go back many, many centuries. And the Mishnah says, Seder Taniyot Ketzad, how do we do these fast days where we're supposed to fast when there's a famine or there's a drought or there's a war? So the Mishnah says what they used to do, Motzina Tateva L'Rechova Shal'ir. They would take the bima out of the shuls and put it out of the shul and put it into the rachov, into the plaza in the city, the central plaza. V'notnim efer makle al gabe ateva. They would put ashes on top of the bima, uberosh anasi uberosh av beitin, and on the head of the Sanhedrin and the assistant head, uberosh av beitin. V'chol echad ve'echad notem brosho, and every one of the people in the plaza who would come to the religious gathering would put, as a sign of mourning, would put ashes on their head. Hazakein shebahem omer lifnehem divrei kibushin, and the eldest one, the zakein, the elder, would speak before them words of reproof. And what would he say? Achenu, our brothers, lo ne'amar be'anshei ninveh vayar Elohim et sakam v'ta'anitam. It doesn't say that God saw the people of Nineveh, that they put on their sackcloth and their fasting, Ela vayar ha'elohim et ma'asehem, ki shavu midarkam hara'ah. It says God saw their actions, that they had repented from their evil ways. Ubekabalahu omer, and in the book, in Nevi'im, other Nevi'im, it says in the book of Joel, V'kir'u levavchem v'al bigdechem. Tear your hearts and not, I would say, just your clothing. So in the Mishnah, which records traditions up until the middle of the 1st century CE going back, you have the tshuva of Anshe Ninveh is seen as a poster child for the tshuva that we're supposed to do on fast days. And of course, eventually it's incorporating to Yom Kippur. And this is also expanded on in the Babylonian Talmud. Lo sak v'ta'anit gormim. It is not the sak, it is not the sackcloth and the fast, which are the ultimate causes of God's forgiveness. Ela teshuva uma'asim tovim gormim. But rather teshuva, repentance, and good deeds are what cause God to himself repent and change his mind. And the Bavli continues in this direction. Vayitkasu basakim ha'adam v'ha'behema. It says that the animals and the human beings, they clothe themselves in sackcloth. So says the Midrash in the Bavli, Mayavu Avdi, what did they do? In a very imaginative description. Asrua beimot l'chud v'tavladot l'chud. They put the animals and their children, the offspring of the animals, in separate pens. Amru lefanav, they said before God, Ribono shel olam, Master of the universe, Im ein atam merachim aleinu, ein anachnu merachim al elu. If you don't show mercy on us, we won't show mercy on them. Vayikru leElohim b'chozka. And they called out to God. And says, my Amur, what did they say? Amru lefanav, Ribono shel olam, aluv v'sheino aluv, tzadik v'rasha, mi nitchem mipnei mi. They called out to God and they said, we are trying to do tshuva. Who should be pushed aside? The Yashuvu ish milakor michamas. Amar Shmuel, said Shmuel, the Amora who lives in the 200s CE in Babylonia. Afilu gazal meresh ubna'o bira. Even if they had stolen something from a hovel and they built it in a big fortress, mikakea kol habira, they would undo the fortress, umachzir meresh leba'ala. They decided they were so pious that they took apart the entire building and they returned the beam to its masters, to its original owners. This is the Bavli. This is the Mishnah, which was written in Eretz Yisrael, but was written in the mid-2nd century and has traditions far beyond, earlier than that. This is the Bavli, quoting Shmuel, who lives in the 2nd century in Bavel and eventually was edited, of course, during the Persian Sasanian period, Zoroastrianism and other things. All of a sudden, we look at the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi, on that same spot, records a very different perspective on the tshuva of the Anshe Ninveh. Very different perspective. Amru Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish, who lives in the 300s CE in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. Tshuva shel remiyut asu Anshe Ninveh. It was a tshuva of deception. That's what they did. Ma'asu. It wasn't real tshuva. Rab Chuna b'shem Rab Shimon ben Chalafta. Again, another 4th century Eretz Yisrael Amora. Hamidu agalimi b'fnim v'motem v'chutz. They put the Again, the same theme. They took the young calves and they put them in the pen inside, and they left their mothers outside. And each one of them would be crying, the mommy for the babies for the mommies. Amrin inlet mitrachmin alein linon merachmin aleim. If you're not going to have rachmanas on us, have rachmanas on them. Meaning they caused the animals in a deceptive way to cry. And that's exactly what happened. That they were engaged in a sense of deception, rimiut. If you remember, Ramai, by Lavan was a Ramai. Lama rimitani. And look at the end, very different than Shmuel. Rabbi Yochanan, ma shaya b'chaf yedeim hichziru. They only returned what was actually was seen in their hand. Ma shaya b'shida teva u'migdal lo hichziru. But that stuff which was hidden away in their pantries and in their furniture and in their migdalim and in their towers, they did not return to the original. It's an amazing contrast between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. Amazing. So what's going on here? Of course, the Midrash doesn't think you can fool God with tshuva. It is a midrashic take on the tshuva of in the Yerushalmi. And the question is, why would the Yerushalmi go in this direction? It is so different than the plain sense of the text. It is so, now, you could say that the Yerushalmi was picking up on the fantastical nature. What's this business of animals doing tshuva? And what's this business of so quickly? How could it be that so quickly people change on a dime? They didn't see it, etc. So about 60 years ago, a number of scholars, most prominently Professor Ephraim Urbach, noted that probably the answer to this midrashic conundrum, the Yerushalmi's total difference than the Babylonian tradition, has to do with time and place. The historical, religious, political, and sociological reality of Eretz Yisrael in the 1st century or earlier, and Bavel in the 2nd, 3rd century, and Eretz Yisrael in the 4th century. The major difference, of course, is the rise of Christianity. And one of the things that we know from Christian sources is that the Christians made great use of these early rabbinic midrashim, like they did of many others, and of biblical texts to shtach the Hebrews, the Jews of their day. So, for example, in the book of Matthew, which is written in the 1st or 2nd century, we don't know exactly, chapter 12, then some of the teachers of the law and the proud religious law keepers said to Jesus, "Teacher, we would like to have you do something special for us to see." He said to them, "The sinful people of this day look for something special to see. There will be nothing special to see but the powerful works of the early preacher Jonah. Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the stomach of a big fish. The Son of Man," that's him, "will be 3 days and 3 nights in the grave also. The men of the city of Nineveh will stand up with the people of this day on the day men stand before God. Those men will say, 'These people are guilty,' because the men of Nineveh were sorry for their sins and turned from them when Jonah preached. And see, someone greater than Jonah is here." So the tshuva of Nineveh will be held against the Jews of the day of his day of Jesus, because they were sincere, but you aren't sincere. Ephraim the Syrian, 4th century Christian preacher, in his drashot on the book of Jonah. He has a long, long drasha, and one of the things that he writes is, Jonah saw this, and wonder seized him. He blushed for the children of his own people. He saw the Ninevites were victorious, and he wept for the seed of Abraham. He saw the seed of Canaan in sound mind, while the seed of Jacob was infatuated. He saw the uncircumcised cut to the heart, This is a classic Christian trope. He saw that those who were uncircumcised in flesh were, of course, circumcised in the heart, while the circumcised had hardened it. And so in Eretz Yisrael, of the 4th century, as we know from many Gemarot and many Midrashim from that period of the 4th and 5th century, when Christianity took hold in the empire, right? When did Constantine make it the official, was it 3 something? And by that time, Christianity was the dominant religion that certainly in Eretz Yisrael that the Jews contended with. Most of the polemics, they didn't exist in Bavel. And it certainly didn't exist in the 1st century or the pre-1st century in Eretz Yisrael, where Christianity was not a big threat to Judaism, etc. You start to find many polemics around this. And so Professor Urbach and others have suggested that that's maybe part of why, from when in the Pshat, the Tshuva of Nineveh, maybe, and certainly in the Bavli was read as a parade example of Tshuva Amitit, of real Tshuva, and should be a model that was turned against the Jews. Those rabbinic homilies were turned against the Jews by the Christians, saying, you who are circumcised of heart, of flesh, are not the circumcised of the heart. The Gentiles are the ones who are the true heirs to the Abrahamic tradition, and therefore the Jews have been abandoned. We are veritus Israel, as the Christians said to the Jews. We are the real Israel. You are carnal Israel. You are the Israel of the flesh, but you're not Israel, the real Israel. And so the Jonah story becomes part of that polemic. Now, again, the Yerushalmi may be picking up, again, if you take that approach, that it is very strange that the animals, and that's part of, so then you can see where there might be a exegetical hook, but what's really driving here is the polemical thrust in these midrashim. Now we can still, next week, when we get to discuss Perek Daled, we're still going to ask the question, when we get into the depth of what Jonah was actually opposed to in God's plan, we may come back to this and have a specific or certain reading that might be possible based on this, but that has to do with our studying of Perek Daled carefully, etc. So this week we did a combination. The first 2 weeks we did pure pshat, and we only looked at the text. But in terms of what we did this week, we looked at both Pshuto Shel Mikra as well as some of the midrashim, which may, again, this is conjecture, may have been influenced by the Jewish-Christian polemic. I'm looking a little bit at the chat. Again, as I said, it's not about fooling God. It's a midrashic read. In Eretz Yisrael, they did not read Maftir Yonah, which might be, again, a support of that idea that Jonah was a problematic book. In the time of Talmud Bavli, there were lots of Christians. Yes, there are stories about Christians, but you have to look about who it's talking about. Are they Eretz Yisrael Amoraim, or are they not Eretz Yisrael Amoraim? When do they live and when don't they live? You don't have lots of anti-Christian polemic in the Mishnah itself. Here and there, you might have it. But in terms of the dominant, people like Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Abahu, these are all people who live in the 300s in Eretz Yisrael, and that's when most of the polemics happen. They don't happen in Bavel with Babylonian Amoraim, etc. You have, of course, stories of mentioned in the Bavli, but they are stories about usually Eretz Yisrael, Amoraim, etc. Okay, Chavirim, I wish everybody a K'tiva v'chatima tova. I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbat Shuvah. which, well, no, we'll see each,
No, yes,
right after Shabbat Shuvah. So have a wonderful Shabbat Shuvah, and I will see you next Sunday morning.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Shana Tova, Ktiva v'Chatima Tova, and it should be a healthy year for everybody. That's we should
Amen.
be back.
Amen.
Last year we left the tent, our backyard minion, and we were at it. My son turned to me, says, 50-50, we're in a tent next year.
Right.
And I said, oh God, please, hopefully, okay, the vaccines weren't quite ready, they'll be ready. And of course, it's not 50-50, it's 100-0. Our shul is not even having the option of indoor davening.
Right. So we have two outside and one inside. So you get
anyways. I like davening outside, but I want to daven outside as a matter of choice, not as a matter of
of being forced.
It's beautiful. Like, I mean, now the shul, I'm in a parking lot. It's not as nice, but most of the year I was in a backyard. Beautiful. The flowers. Okay, in the winter there was white on the ground, but as the weather improved, it was green and colorful and beautiful and whatever. It's anyways. All right, should be well. Okay. Everybody stay on board.
Rabbi Helfgot?
Yeah.
Hi, Richie and Sharon Alman.
Oh, hi, Richie.
Baruch Hashem. Do you remember Shmuel Yehu from camp at all?
I do remember him. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, that's we figured that it would be nice to have someone who had some sort of remembrance. We dedicated to Shiurim in his memory. His yard site was on Friday. Yeah. Okay. Anyhow, thank you so much.
Amen.
We enjoy very much. Thank you.
Okay. Amen.
Take care.
Thank you. Okay, in 12 minutes, Rabbi Liebtag will be on. You can go get a cup of coffee, go stretch, or as I see my kids are putting up our sukkah. So maybe I'll go help them for a couple minutes, and then we'll resume, please, God, at 12:15. Just to let you know, the rest of the week, Thursday, Tzom Gedalia, Rabbi Schwat will conclude his series on Arot HaTshuvah. Then I will give a shiur 9:30 Friday morning, my sort of regular time slot. But instead of Pirkei Avot, I'll talk about the parsha, I believe, because instead of Thursday night, people will be eating. And I'll let you know the topic as soon as I figure that out exactly. And then on Sunday, you heard Rav Nadi, again, we'll be back to finish, and Rabbi Helfgot will be back, and Rabbi Liebtag, the same double header. And next Monday, Rebecca Winter will be giving sort of the fourth in that the tag team series on Tshuva in Tanakh, stories in Tanakh at Tshuva. That's at 1. At 11, Benaya Mitzner will be giving a shiur b'ivrit. He's a tremendous Talmid Chacham learning in Kollel Eretz Chemda. He will be giving a shiur b'ivrit on Tshuva Ben Adam Lechaviro. How exactly do you go about, just not walking with a friend and I say, hi, are you mocha me? So we're going to discuss that issue. That will be the Monday shiur at 11 a.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. in Israel, Monday of Aser Timei Tshuva. So that's sort of the schedule the next little week. And we're working on our post-Yom Tov schedule, and we'll keep you posted. I'm open for ideas still. Anybody have wonderful speakers we should invite, especially somebody if they just want to speak once. We filled up about half of the Parshat HaShavua shiurim for next year already, but we have the half that we haven't filled up. So, still, if you're always open to ideas, we greatly appreciate it. And if I can make mention before Hashem, we always appreciate your support, your financial support. These classes are free for you, but they're not free to run, as you can imagine. So we greatly appreciate those who do sponsor classes and any donations. So all donations, any donations are greatly appreciated. Okay, I still left you with a 10-minute break for Rabbi Liebtag. We'll see you soon. Thank you very much.